respected Registrar Sir, respected Deans, my esteemed colleagues, and dear friends, to the panel discussion on solutions to plastic pollution organized by Center for Environmental Laws, HNLU, on the occasion of World Environment Day 2023. Now, without any further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Ankit Awasthi Sir, Assistant Professor of Law, HNLU, for the welcome address.
Thank you, Urvi ma'am. A very good evening and a warm welcome to all of you to this enlightening panel discussion on solutions to plastic pollution. On behalf of the Center for Environmental Laws and the School for Law and Public Policy, it's my distinct honor and privilege to extend a warm welcome to all our esteemed guests, distinguished speakers, and participants who have taken the time to be the part of this engaging and insightful event. HNLU has always been committed to fostering intellectual discourse, knowledge sharing, and collaborative efforts aimed at addressing the most pressing challenges of our time and issues. And today's panel discussion is also no exception of the same. Today, we have virtually gathered with a shared purpose and a common commitment to address one of the most pressing environmental challenges of our time, that is plastic pollution. In this context, the Center for the Environmental Laws has taken the initiative to organize this panel discussion, which aims to explore socio-legal aspects related with plastic pollution. By bringing together experts, we hope to foster a meaningful exchange of ideas and experiences in addressing this global crisis. It's a matter of immense pleasure for me to extend a welcome address to our esteemed resource persons, Mr. Sanjay Upadhyay, Sir, Advocate Supreme Court of India, and Professor Dr. Ramesh Sir, former Professor of Law, NLSIU Bengaluru. Their presence here today speaks volumes about their dedication to their respective fields and their commitment to making a positive impact on the society. Sir, we are truly fortunate to have you as our resource person, and we are eagerly await for your valuable contributions. It's indeed an honor to have Mr. Sanjay Upadhyay sir among us today. With his vast knowledge and extensive experience in environmental law, Mr. Upadhyay has been at the forefront of advocating for the protection and conservation of our environment. We are grateful that he has graciously spared his valuable time to be here with us as a resource person and share his insight on tackling plastic pollution. Additionally, we are privileged to have Professor Dr. M.K. Ramesh, a distinguished academician and former Professor of Law at the National Law School of India University, Bengaluru. Professor Ramesh has made significant contributions to the field of environmental law and policy and has been actively engaged and involved in research, teaching, and advocacy related to environmental laws and sustainability. We are immensely grateful for your presence, sir, today. Moreover, I would also like to extend a special welcome to all the participants attending this panel discussion. Your presence here today demonstrates that your keen interest in the environmental governance and your commitment to seeking meaningful solutions. The importance of finding effective solutions to plastic pollution cannot be overstated. It requires a multifaceted approach encompassing policy interventions, technological innovations, behavioral challenges, and collaboration across various sectors. As we embark on this panel discussion, let us keep in mind that our collective efforts today have the potential to shape a cleaner, greener, and more sustainable future for generations to come. Once again, I extend a warm welcome to all of you, our esteemed guests and participants, and express my deepest gratitude to our resource persons for gracing us with their presence and wisdom. May this panel discussion be a platform for enlightening discussions, thought-provoking insights, and constructive ideas that pave the way for effective solutions to plastic pollution. Let us make the most of this opportunity to engage in this meaningful dialogue, broaden our horizons, and strive towards finding actionable solutions to the challenges we face. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for the welcome address. I would now like to request Professor Dr. Yogendra Kumar Srivastava, Professor of Law and Director, School for Law and Public Policy, HNLU, to present the opening remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Urvi. A very warm good evening to one and all present. Once again, I want to welcome both the esteemed panelists on behalf of the Hidayatullah National Law University fraternity, and as well as on behalf of Honorable Vice Chancellors. I would like to welcome you all to the virtual panel discussion on the urgent and critical topic of the solutions to plastic pollution. Today, on the auspicious occasion of World Environment Day, the Center for Environmental Law under School for Law and Public Policy has organized this session to address one of the most pressing environmental challenges of our time. In fact, plastic pollution has become an overwhelming global crisis, affecting every corner of our beautiful planet, from the towering mountains to the deepest ocean trenches. Plastic waste persists, choking our ecosystem, harming wildlife, and jeopardizing human health as well. As we witness the devastating consequences of our collective actions, the time has come for us to confront this challenge head-on and forge a path towards a more sustainable future. Here, I want to share 2-3 important facts based on latest report of United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, dated 25th April 2023. The impact of plastic pollution has reached alarming levels. And how we can say it is true? They have mentioned a few important figures in this important report. Out of the 369 million tons of plastic waste generated every year, about 11 million metric tons enters the ocean, as per UNCTAD and UNEP report 2022. This number is projected to triple by 2040 if no measures are adopted to halt that pace. It is alarming. It's a global challenge for us. And in terms of economy, annual costs of plastic pollution are estimated at $2.2 trillion, including $1.5 trillion in ocean damage, $695 billion in greenhouse gas emissions, and approximately $25 billion in land pollution as such, as per this important report. This is based on economic facts. And in March 2022, it is also a very important development. The United Nations Environment Assembly adopted a resolution on plastic pollution that calls for countries to promote material substitutes to plastics through national policy instruments, while on the multilateral level, efforts should be made to further develop the harmonized system, HS code. The resolution emphasizes also the promotion of plastic substitutes to not only reduce the direct environmental impact, such as ocean pollution, but also to incentivize innovations and ocean and circular economy and new industrial capacities, particularly with reference to developing and least developing countries. And interestingly, when I was going through with the judgments, I want to share latest judgment, today's judgment cited in bar and bench. Rajasthan High Court once again upholds ban on laminated paper cups, plates, and glasses. And Justice Sameer Jain, Honorable Justice Sameer Jain, observed that plastic coated paper cups, plates, and glasses comprises even 95% paper and 5% of a thin layer of a low density polythene, LDPE, and concluded that they are single-use plastic commodities because in the year 2021, August 2021, the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change in August 2021 had issued a notification under the Plastic Waste Management and Handling Rules 2011 that prohibited the manufacture, import, stocking, distribution, sale, and use of identified single-use plastic items with effect from 1st July 2022. So definitely, this is a global crisis as well as a crisis at a national level. But who they are responsible, this is a big question, particularly when we have a good laws to handle such situations, particularly with reference to the same plastic waste management and handling rules 2011 is all talking about the responsibilities on the shoulder of municipal authorities. And because they all are responsible for setting up operationalization and coordination of the waste management system and for protecting the associate functions. Definitely our esteemed panelists will throw more light on the same, because today in this panel discussion, we are going to have the honor of hearing two brilliant minds in the domain of environmental law and policy. I firmly believe that Honorable Shri Sanjay Upadhyay sir and Professor Dr. M.K. Ramesh sir, with their invaluable insights, experiences, and innovative ideas, will enrich and enlighten our participants. And in the spirit of World Environment Day, let us remember that the choices we make today will determine the legacy we leave behind for generations to come. Together, we have the power to create a cleaner, greener, and more sustainable world. As we engage in this panel discussion, let us keep in mind that change is not a one-time event. It is a continuous process requiring unwavering commitment, collaboration, and dedication. May this platform serve as a catalyst for change, sparking a global movement towards sustainable practices and serving a beacon of hope for future generations. Thank you all. Jai Hind. Over to you, Uru.
Thank you, sir, for sharing your insights on the pressing issue of plastic pollution. Moving ahead with the addresses by our esteemed panel members. Firstly, we have with us today Mr. Sanjay Upadhyay, sir, Advocate, Supreme Court of India. Sir is the founder and managing partner of the India's first environmental law firm, Enviro Legal Defense Firm. Sir has also established the charitable arm of the law firm through the Environmental Law and Development Foundation. Sir has been practicing environment and development law since 1993. An India visiting fellow at the Bolt Hall School of Law, University of California, Berkeley, and a legal intern to the Earth Justice Legal Defense Fund, San Francisco, Sir started his professional career at the Worldwide Fund for Nature, India, at the Center for Environmental Law. Sir has served as an environmental and development law expert to most well-known international, multilateral, national, and state institutions, including World Bank, IUCN, FAO of United Nations, UNDP, ILO, WWF, Greenpeace, University of Cambridge, Duke University, amongst others. Sir has been part of drafting committees of several forests, wildlife, and biodiversity related legislations, both at national and state levels. Sir practices in the Supreme Court of India and particularly in the National Green Tribunal. Sir, I would now request you to please take over for your address.
Thank you so much for that very long introduction. It's a real honor and a pleasure to be here amongst the actual luminary who's my next co-speaker, Professor Ramesh, who's actually our teacher and who taught us a lot and has been teaching us a lot during our career, which spans about just about 3 decades, which just shows how young he is in the discipline. So it's a real honor to be here. Also to Dr. Rana Navneet Roy, who is very kind enough to invite me, Professor Yogendra Srivastava, whom I just heard for the first time with his very powerful opening remarks, and Dr. Ankit Avasthi. I think we've been involved in the past as well, so it's a real honor. I don't know whether you can really gain expertise in a discipline like environmental law in one lifetime. But having spent about 3 decades now, one wonders how much we have to learn and how much we have to really work towards perhaps saving some bit of the planet with your efforts. So I'm going to straight away jump into my conversation. I do have a presentation, but I'm going to avoid the presentation. I'm just going to speak through those aids. I just wanted to, capture a few of the broad topics. I mean, we all know the challenge. The figures were just, spoken by Professor Srivastav. In terms of the kind of plastic waste we are talking about, figures like 34 lakh tons in 2019-20, 2.5 tons of generated per annum in India per 1,000 population. There are a lot of figures which are out there. The bottom line is it's a humongous problem. And how do you deal with it? The dangers are well known, how this disintegrates into microplastics, how it flows into the rivers, oceans, the kind of toxins released, etc., etc. Now, how have we responded is the key. And then how are we working towards that is the other key. I mean, right from 1999, if you look at the recycled plastic manufacture and usage rules, which for the first time under the EPA did talk about regulating plastic carry bags and containers. That's where they. So it's not it's not a very new problem. People have realized the menace of plastic waste for many years now, and right from almost 13 years of actual regulation. If you look at how the law has evolved, that becomes very, I would say, revealing in terms of the manner in which the ministry looks at it, the manner in which the Central Pollution Control Board looks at it. And if you look at the next legislation which came almost a decade later, which is the Plastic Waste Management Handling Rules of 2011, things like compostable plastic, how do you disintegrate plastics, the concept of the extended producer responsibility, who will be responsible, how will the municipal authority be responsible, how do you deal with multi-layered plastics, how do you manage plastic waste, where do you see the role of the waste picker. All these concepts have been discussed as early as 2011. In fact, what is plastic waste and the entire definition of plastic waste for the first time came in 2011. So thereafter, of course, the current plastic waste management rules, which came with the new government in 2016, and there it's been a pretty elaborate framework, I would say. But the problem with the elaborate framework is that when you try to put everything in the system, when you try to put everything in the framework, you often end up confusing the implementer. And I think that's exactly the first problem I would like to highlight. If you look at, for example, who are these rules applicable to? Who are the main stakeholders? If you look at the plastic waste management rules, you'll find it's a very long list of stakeholders. Now, that itself becomes a bit confusing. For example, who's a manufacturer? Who's a waste generator? Who is an importer? Who is a producer? Who is a brand owner? Who is an institutional waste generator? Who is a street vendor? Who is a retailer? Which is the local body we're talking about? How does the Gram Panchayat fit in? What exactly is the role of the waste picker? Now, these are the variety of stakeholders that are supposed to be implementing or getting impacted by the plastic waste management rules. Now, to my understanding, their definitions are overlapping. Today, for example, if you ask who should register, whether a producer should register or a brand owner should register or an institutional waste generator should register, it's pretty confusing. So something of a hand holding that needs to be done is still a way off. The whole concept of EPR, for example, the extended producer responsibility, a means by which the producer of this is responsible till the end of life of that particular product. But it's easier said than done. I mean, I know that very huge industries, very huge organizations who've been dealing with plastics, I'm not going to name them, but you'll find in your literature review that big organizations were not really even bothered about how to really manage their plastic waste. They have wrapped things up, they have gone to your doors, but they have not really gone about fixing their extended producer responsibility, other than just probably handing it to a producer responsibility organization or things like that. So these are concepts that were introduced. It's been a while now, And I think now, after 7, 8 years, this really needs to take off, which it is not. Basically, what we have realized that when you put conditions, for example, of how to deal with manufacturers or importers or distributors, these conditions have to be fulfilled. And who ensures that is the real challenge. Things like thickness of a carry bag. The other day we were fighting a case on plastic PVC banners, and after much sort of pushing the envelope or pushing the system, we got to get one particular amendment, and there it was said that okay, PVC banners will be banned. However, less than 100 microns only. So we don't know. I mean, who's measuring these microns at what level? How come regulators will be responsible to implement such a conditionality or a parameter? I think these are real issues that needs to be looked at fairly carefully, because if you look at the mandatory registration processes for producers or recyclers or manufacturers or brand owners, they're supposed to be registered on behalf of the SPCPs for commencing production. But today, I don't know whether we have those inventories out there in the public to even implement this, let alone the regulator themselves, because these are very, very crucial aspects of plastic waste management. If you look at the categorization, for example, if you look at, let's say, the Central Pollution Control Board classification of industries, you'll find that people who are dealing with plastics are actually categorized differently. So, for example, if you're talking to industries who are reprocessing plastic waste, they are in the orange category. If you look at the polythene and the plastic processed products who are manufacturing virgin plastics, they are in the green category. If you're talking about plastic ropes, etc., they are in the white category of industries. So even the way plastic-based industries or waste management of plastic, the industrial waste management of plastics, the categorization is a little blurred. And I think we really need to get on with the plastic waste management industries to be categorized in a little more uniformed way so that people are aware of how to really go about regulating them. Then, if you look at the guidelines, for example, the guidelines issued by CPCB right from 1998 onwards, it's mind-boggling. If you look at the way, the guidelines on recycling of plastics, for example, way back in 98, then 2016 onwards, we have at least 16 sets of guidelines on a variety of plastic related issues. For example, if you look at how to dispose thermoset plastic waste, including sheet molding, etc. How do you look at closure of unauthorized plastic carry bags manufacturing industries? There are directions under Section 5 of the EPA on that. How do you look at the closure of unauthorized plastic carry bags on the location of bank of river Ganga? There are separate directions for that. There are guidelines for co-processing of plastic waste in cement kilns, for example. Then there are consolidated guidelines on segregation, collection of disposal of plastic waste, for example. You have certification SOPs for manufacturers, for sellers of compostable plastic carry bags, for example. You have guidelines for disposal of non-recyclable fraction of multi-layered plastic waste. You have guidelines for management of sanitary waste. You have guidelines for recognition of PROs, which is the producer responsibility organizations, who are often hired by big companies to manage their plastic waste. Then, of course, there's the uniform framework on EPR, which is the extended producer responsibility. You have directions on banning and storing packaging, which sells cigarettes and gutkas and tobaccos and pan masalas, etc. You have directions for registration of plastic brand owners, producers, and fulfillment of EPR responsibility. Then you have directions for institutional mechanism for enforcement of the rules themselves. You have action plans for PIBOs, as they are called, the producer, importers, brand owners for plastic management. You have SOPs for PIBOs for their registration. You have guidelines for imposition of environmental compensation. The reason I wanted to rattle off these various guidelines and directions and clarifications is how much do we know about how plastic is managed? How are these standards, these guidelines, these directions, these clarifications are reaching to the regulator? reaching to the people at large as to if they see a problem on plastic waste, whom do they go to? And I think these are very crucial information. And this is not the end. If you look at the state laws, for example, every state has come up with their set of frameworks on plastic waste, ranging from, for example, in Andaman Nicobar Island, you have, freight charges for transportation of plastic waste. There are exemption of freight charges, notification for implementation. In a variety of states, you'll see how do we really implement PWR rules, the plastic waste rules. How do we look at solid waste management bylaws and its linkage with the plastic waste? There are n number of bylaws in all the states, called differently. Somewhere it's called non-degradable garbage control acts, somewhere it's called Jai Vanasya Apashishta Niyantran Adhiniyam, somewhere it's called plastic carry bag rules, somewhere it's called plastic and thermocol products, somewhere it's called manufacture, sale, use of throwing of low density plastic bags act. The point I'm making again is everybody has their own instrument of regulating plastic waste. Now the problem is when we have too many instruments, the integration becomes a big problem. And this is exactly what I think is happening. Even simple things like environmental compensation. So if you for example, if you have failed in implementing the waste management rules or plastic waste management rules, what kind of environmental compensation can be levied? Where is the formula? Different states have come up with their own adaptation. Even the NGT in different cases have come up with different compensation measures. Finally, I think in July 2022, a particular rule was introduced in the plastic waste management rules, which sort of now settles the debate of what kind of environmental compensation has to be levied based on the polluter pays principle, which is as per the guidelines of CPCB. Finally, the CPCB in September 2022 has issued some guidelines for environmental compensation for violation of plastic waste management rules. Similarly, there are now bans on carry bags and single-use plastics. In fact, as I was saying earlier, it was a case of Edwin Wilson that in the Supreme Court that pushed the new amendments of 2021, where a number of single-use plastics have now been banned, as it was said, from 1st of July 2022. But all these bans, whether they are being effective, whether there's a regulatory mechanism in place, whether there is a task force at place to implement that, is perhaps a bigger debate. Then, of course, the ban on PVC plastic advertising and campaigning products, we've been sort of hounding different courts on this, just to get some orders. And there have been some orders now which talks about ban on PVC and plastic advertising. To my mind, I think it's the most useless way of advertising when you are creating thousands and thousands of tons of PVC material, which can be easily replaced by much more environment friendly products, and then using it for the first time and single time, and then it goes off just after the elections. And I hope that by 2024, several advisories by the Election Commission of India should eventually ban PVC plastic advertising and campaigning products, because that's a huge menace that needs to be controlled quite well. And then, of course, we have the various amendments that have been done in the plastic waste management rules. I'm not going to bore you with all the details, but sufficient to say that the ministry has been constantly working towards new amendments and trying to streamline things. So, for example, the 11th of March 2021 amendment rules do talk about non-woven plastic bags. How do we look at plastic waste processing? How do you really deal with SUPs? How do you deal with thermoset plastic, etc., and thermoplastics and so on? There are now concepts of compostable plastic products. In fact, there were petitions on oxy-biodegradable plastics as well, which is not so prevalent in India, but again, people have been talking about that. Similarly, the biggest challenge to my mind is how do you ensure a robust framework on EPR? I think that is perhaps the key, because when you look at end-of-life treatment of people who've been manufacturing plastic or producing plastic or who are brand owning plastic, how do we really manage the quantum that is produced back to how it is being used end of life, and then how it is recovered in the manner in which the plastic waste management rules really delineate those uses? I think that's perhaps the biggest challenge. And there have been amendments to that effect as well. If you look at the July 2022 amendment, for example, you will see a number of important definitions being added in terms of how to deal with end of life disposal. How do we talk about energy recovery? How do you talk about plastic packaging, pre-consumer plastic packaging, etc., etc. So there has been a constant sort of attempt to look into these functioning of the plastic waste management rules, and I hope and pray that this is done in a robust manner. If you look at the institutional framework, for example, you'll find MOEF at the top, CPCB as the main standard setting organization, assisted by the SPCBs, the Department of Environment, and then an entire focus on the urban local bodies and the Gram Panchayat. Now, if you look at the structure, I think the manner in which they are strengthened is a big issue, because to my understanding, the level of capacity building that is going on as far as MOEF actors are concerned, or when you come down to the ULBs and the Gram Panchayats, there's a huge disconnect, because they're supposed to be doing everything. I mean, if you look at the ULBs, for example, they have 29 functions that they're supposed to do at the local level. The Gram Panchayat has its own responsibilities. Now, if you look at just one particular waste like the plastic waste, how do you really implement all that I have just said, in terms of guidelines, laws, amendments, back to that local body? How capacitated are they? And it is impossible almost if you don't get the strengthening or the orientation in a much more uniform manner and a robust manner with resources to implement all the fancy guidelines that we have created. Because the judiciary, we have seen, I mean, I'm not going to take much time on this, but what I've realized is the judiciary, right from 1995 onwards, if you see a sort of a trend analysis, they have been at it. They've been talking about, the menace of dumping of plastic bags. I can go on and on. With every aspect of plastic waste management, you have a judicial decision in place. The trouble again is, how do we take those judicial decisions back to the implementing authority? Because we're talking about the same regulator who has failed at times in implementing those guidelines or the laws. So again, despite very strong judicial mandates of managing plastic waste, we have still not really resolved the problem. Somewhere we need to think a lot about how to go about it. And in my understanding, and I'll keep quiet after this, I think somewhere we have missed the bus of who to really empower. And if you really go back to the grassroots, you have the most important player, the waste picker, the rag picker. Is he or she the part of a central planning process? Unless you build around people who really matter on the ground, unless you empower them, unless you make them safe, unless you incentivize them through an institutional robust mechanism, we will never be able to solve this problem. And I think we have ignored the main actor for far too long. If you look at your process of registration, for example, how many of them are actually getting registered? What is the liability if you don't register? Is the manufacturer getting registered? Is every producer getting registered? Is there an inventory that we have for public knowledge? The answer is no. Do we have a strong EPR mechanism? Can it be streamlined, starting from bottom up? The answer is still no. There are too many amorphous players. There are dealers, there are traders, there are platforms for transactions, there are warehouses, there are intermediary organizations. How do you really bring them into the supply chain? These are real challenges on the ground. R&D, are we really focusing on new technologies? Are we really talking about right recoveries of compostable plastics or other plastics, for example? Are we really paying attention on oxy-biodegradable plastic, for example? Is there any huge support for that? The entire world is perhaps divided between this compostable and oxy-biodegradable plastic. There's a very little. When we took up this matter to the Supreme Court didn't even understand what we were talking about. And very, very learned judges out there, but they could not make the difference between a compostable plastic and oxy-biodegradable plastic and what's the economics around it. These are very, very huge challenges for judiciary as well. Many big players are still clueless unless they are really pushed by courtrooms, and which is a very sad state of affairs, I would say. Big players are supposed to be, all their corporate environmental responsibility, they should start from their doorstep to start with. Many are willing, but but they're not sure how to go about it. They are very scared that if I'm a big player and if I go to the ministry saying that I have not done it, can I do it now? They'll be fined. There is no incentive based mechanism. So I think somewhere we need to work towards them in a rather, in a comprehensive way, so that we really have big players coming in and setting the trend, because government alone cannot solve this problem. That is very clear. Because if you look at the capacity of the regulator, it is a huge task. I'm not blaming the regulator, but if you look at the regulator, the way they are structured in terms of the coverage they need to do, it is almost impossible to implement all that I have just said by one set of regulators. And we haven't really made, as I said earlier also, can we make that rag picker or that waste packer as the part of the regulator's army? And I think that is where we need to begin from bottom up. Perhaps there will be some solution with all the other things that I have said. And sorry if I have taken a lot of time. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And I'm really looking forward to hearing Professor Ramesh, and I hope I have made some points which you might take home today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for enlightening us with your words of wisdom. Proceeding with the program, we have with us today Professor Dr. M.K. Ramesh, sir. Sir joined NLSIU in June 1992 and retired in November 2021. And sir also served as university's vice chancellor between August to September 2019. Sir was a senior Fulbright fellow in the US and environmental law fellow at the Environmental Law Institute, Washington, D.C. Sir has also been associated with various institutes as adjunct and visiting professor, including IIT Kharagpur, KTH Stockholm, Dalhousie Law School, Canada, amongst others. Sir has held various positions such as chair professor, urban poor and the law instituted by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Poverty Alleviation, Government of India, chairman of the Research and Policy Advisory Committee, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change of India, law expert member at the National Biodiversity Authority, member of steering committee for 12th five-year plan on environment, forest, wildlife and climate change, to name a few. As a member of number of expert bodies, Sir has been involved in aiding, advising, and assisting the state and central governments in the environmental lawmaking process. Sir has advised the Government of India in its preparations for Paris Agreement on climate change. Sir's contribution have been utilized by UNDP, UNEP, ADB, World Bank, IUCN, amongst others. Sir, I would now request you to please take over for your address.
Thank you very much for a very elaborated, a very generous introduction of mine. Professor Urvi Srivatsava, Professor Ankit, Professor Yogesh, all the other organizers of this event, and the one who actually brought me into this, Dr. Navneet. I join Advocate Sanjay Upadhyay in extending my greetings on the World Environment Day to you. One thing that was missing in introducing Sanjay Upadhyay is, I just don't know how many of you know, he is a pioneer. He is a pioneer as a practitioner of law to have set up an environmental law firm when that idea never ever occurred to anyone in India. And he was one of those brave hearts who was able to establish, demonstrate, and train, build the capacity of law professionals, acting as a kind of a finishing school in environmental law and practice, to scores and scores of students equipped by us only in the theoretical aspect of the law by law schools like mine. While I remained a preacher all the while, he has the hands-on experience and such a kind of an very lucid way of putting things together, as you were given a little glimpse of in these 20 odd minutes, has actually lightened whatever that I had to say. Mine can only be a footnote. to what Sanjay has put together. I have nothing to add except add a few explanatory notes to many of the things that he has put together. He has identified the problem along with Yogesh, who did that very lucidly in the very beginning, and has been able to really reflect upon the legal solutions, the problems ailing the entire environmental law governance system, and the case study being that of the plastics. I will just pick a couple of strands and then very briefly narrate them in my own way. But I also noticed that this happens to be the first inaugural program of the Environmental Law Center. So if time permits, in the 20 minutes time that you have allotted, I've already spent about 4-5 minutes. I shall be able to quickly run through this panel thing for the simple reason that you are conversant with the law, you are conversant with the problems, you are conversant with the solutions as well as has been attempted by him. I will just add a little bit of a gloss to them. And I will also reflect on what kind of a change in an academic institution like yours can do to help matters in finding solution to not just plastic pollution, but everything that ails the environmental law and the governance system. Well, you know that just picking on that, make the rack picker as the core of the solution package suggested by Sanjay. I think he has touched the a very sensitive chord and the real core of identifying and finding solutions to the problem. You know that in the United Nations system, there is the United Nations Environmental Assembly, and there is the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee on Plastic Pollution. In its very first assembly session of this negotiating committee, when they were to look to solutions to the problems concerning plastics, they precisely did what Sanjay did convey. Voice of the waste picker was heard. In fact, that is something who deals with this day to day long before your local bodies got into the picture, long before the specialized agencies, the autonomous bodies like the pollution control bodies came on to the picture. But little was heard of him and little was done around him. When you think of governance, the real player is hardly being seen, felt, and his contribution being recognized, respected, and given the due place it deserves. This is what the committee did. And from that learning that they got, just a few days back, between 29th of May to 2nd of June, they had their second meeting. And what was that second meeting about? That was essentially to construct a legal ordering to find solution to plastic pollution. Start with the grassroots and look into all the dimensions and then find solutions. We have never done that. We borrow from so many other people and then just try to impose on that. You have the central government, the oversight, and the state agency, the same kind of a thing. And year after year, you celebrate the Day of Environment. And each year you have a different theme. But what you do is the same old thing. Believe me, I and Sanjay have witnessed this Environmental Day being celebrated for the last 30-40 years. And it's the same story. Same story of talking about problems and promising performance. But when it comes to walking the talk, you see a huge gap. Why is it? Everyone talks about environment, but hardly anyone takes responsibility. Anyone actually ensures that somebody is made accountable and action being taken and results are being found. You know that in the year 2021, when we came up with a new set of regulations that extended producer responsibility being made into an integral aspect of this law as a strategy of enforcing this law, a commitment was made. And what was that commitment? That 1 year hence, we would ensure that there would no longer be single-use plastics. So you have the central government, the state pollution control boards, the CPCB coming up with one exercise after another, as very rightly said by Sanjay, about very detailed rules and regulations, host of guidelines, action plans, highly technical, confusing, and nobody knows what to do and how to go about things. Not that it's not there, it is not detailed, but nobody takes pains in going through. And who is that nobody I'm talking about? Those who are having the steering wheel of governance, the Pollution Control Board. Both of us have been working very closely with these pollution control boards, both CPCB and SPCB. We can dare say that their capacity building exercises, of which we have been part of the training programs as resource persons, we know very well that these are the very people who lack their capacity in imparting capacity on someone who has to enforce. You have a body which would be a regulator, would be a monitor, which would actually have something called as an information-based manager, educator, and capacity builder besides being enforcer. That's what the pollution control boards are about. But how much of these functions they actually discharge? And capacity building, it has always been a casualty. Year after year, we are invited to these training programs, and I asked for the entire program layout. And believe me, the same previous year's layout has been recycled with minor cosmetic touches here and there. Maybe the resource persons are different. And since the dramatist persona who would be participating in the program are different, you can recycle the same stuff. Like the good old teacher who would be remembering the same old notes and recycling it to the classroom. They have been doing the same thing all the while. I think the bane and the serious problem of environmental effective enforcement has been at the doorstep of this enforcer in the first place. The second one, the real player. The real player who is supposed to be in the field neither knows his task nor discharges the task with that kind of responsibility, that kind of confidence. I'm deliberately using the expression confidence because he does not know what he has to do. So many guidelines. And how to go about it, he doesn't know. The municipalities and the local bodies. And the kind of training, the kind of capacity building that they get is something which is going to leave a lot to be desired. How do you really expect them to really make this law work? Apart from the corruption, inaction, irresponsibility, which is part of the system that we have. Put this real player as the central one, and around him, going by his experiences and the solutions that he has been able to find. The Raddiwala has been able to find better solutions than any of these technical experts have been able to come. 2011, 2021, 2022, all those amendments that have come, they have become more technical rather than being able to really make use of that homespun native wisdom of this rag picker. This is something that needs to be done. Apart from this problem of enforcement, you have the serious problem of coordination. Lack of integration, that's what he was mentioning about. Lack of integration amongst the host of regulations. Lack of integration among the different players. You know, within the pollution control board, you have different sections. and different units. You have a research wing as well. And how much of the input that comes from the research wing would get into those who are in the field? I think there has to be some kind of a performance audit to be done. In fact, performance audit has been done by the Comptroller and Auditor General of India over a period of time regularly. And you know, when the Comptroller and Auditor General comes up with such reports about the performance relating between the investment made, the expenses incurred, and the results obtained, they have a constitutional status to be tabled before the parliament, and the state has to initiate action. You know for sure in 2009, when such a thing was tabled before the parliament, submitted to the parliament, never tabled. We talk of administrative irresponsibility. We have problem of the legislators displaying irresponsibility for the simple reason that much of the problem would be at their doorstep, and they will be held answerable for their commissions and omissions. Commissions, in a different sense of the term. This is something that we need to look into. And in terms of the information base, because one of the tests of monitoring and effectiveness of it, one of the tests of effective implementation lies in your information base. Go to any pollution control board. How much of information they have? Each one of you, in some way or the other, you must have noticed in all the newspaper reports and some of the things that were mentioned by Yogesh are only guesstimates. None of them are authentic. None of them are authentic. In fact, the problem is many times over than what has been projected. And that's because of the information gap that we have. And this is something that needed to be strengthened, without which ensuring effective implementation would remain a chimera. And finally, it is something that I and you can do. And this is what I'm just mentioning the students here, that when you think of banning of plastics, it is not about every kind of plastics that you are going to ban. It is not an extremist view here. It's about those which are incapable of recycling, reusing, reducing, which is one of those basic techniques that's adopted in environmental governance, and then educating and empowering those who are supposed to be in the field as to how to go about it. This is something that's not happening. You have environmental marathons carried out every year with new t-shirts coming to us. That's all the game. But awareness, be assured that everyone is aware about our environmental problems. I don't think we need to reinvent this wheel. But how do you really get into action? How do we really bring in the kind of change that can be ushered in? Academic institutions can do. And your Center for Environmental Law can do much more than the centers of environmental law that are there all around. You can make a difference. Get back to the curriculum again. Have you ensured that it is? This is something that I think every teacher need have to keep in mind. Environmental law is one area of law which is ever expanding, and it's new every year. And you need to really not just refresh yourself, you need to really upgrade yourself in both in its understanding and the kind of tools that you employ in pedagogy, in imparting that knowledge as to make somebody practice fit. I think need to have a different kind of an orientation. Just one suggestion. And my suggestion to you is that when you are thinking of your environmental law center and the pedagogy, why don't you really make a conscious effort in ensuring that environmental law learning is not just confined to that set syllabi that you have on environmental law. Environmental law is something which is not just a discipline, but it is transdisciplinary in its content and application. I think this is something that one as a teacher, one as a researcher in every academic institution should do. And look at the language of every provision in every bit of environmental regulations that we have. They don't read like law at all. There is technology in it. There is biochemistry in it. There are ecological sciences in it. There is environmental economics in it. You name it. Every discipline finds place in it. Then I think one need have to equip oneself in each one of them before we impart that education. You should build the capacity of your own students in environmental law learning as not just as yet another discipline, but something that is not just an optional one, but something that is mandatory and inevitable, which can permeate into every aspect of law. Sanjay can tell you, and as I have experienced as a teacher, that I can find the environmental law content in every conceivable discipline of law, without any single exception. All that you need have to do is, you need have to look at the very goals. What is that you are looking for? The goal is environmental justice, which is a combination of human justice and justice to the environment. There is an element of equity in it. And for that, you need to conserve, you need to protect and sustainably use in an environmentally benign way the resources. This is the goal. And for doing that, you have a host of principles. I don't need to really get into a lecture mode as to say what those principles are. Polluter pays, extended producer responsibility that has been mentioned now, public trust doctrine. Well, you look into every law that you teach and see how exactly these can find place in each one of them through your very tool interpretation of that law, by invoking these principles, and see how well the integration in the working of different aspects of regulations take place, how the integration among the different players in governance would take place. Managing environment, managing plastics is not the exclusive monopoly of the CPCB or SPCB. The local bodies are very much there, and without taking the urban bodies and rural bodies, the panchayats, into confidence and working with them, you cannot make this work. And to that end, there has to be enough, sufficient backup coming from academic institutions in terms of policy intervention, in terms of enabling and facilitating. The judges require your help in research as to how to go about things. You have best practices available, but please don't replicate those best practices available elsewhere. Most of them are technology ridden, and these are without any second thought are being made part of Indian law into it. There are local solutions available, and that's where exactly you have to keep this real player at the center to really ensure that native wisdom to bloom and become an integral aspect of environmental governance. We talk of engaging people. It is not just by consultation. People have their own wisdom of handling these and finding alternatives to these. Tap that. It is something of that kind that needed to come through academic institutions, make it a 365 days exercise and not just a one day to celebrate. The center need have to take it up. First, integrate with all other centers that you have in your law school. Integrate with all other disciplines of law that you have, and bring in that environmental consciousness and environmental conscientizement in them. I think there lies the trick. It should become a way of life, not just for the politicians to tell us that, but it should be something that should be ingrained in us as teachers, which we can impart and build capacity of others. If we don't have that capacity, we cannot build the capacity of anyone on that. With this, let me conclude. I think suddenly I have gotten into a lecture mode. I have not touched upon anything for the simple reason that Sanjay has already done that and much more than that you can think of. 25 minutes, excellent exercise of laying before you the entire format of the law, the ailments that are there, the solutions that are there. Take his help. And in terms of practical learning, none better than people like Ritvik, people like Sanjay, people like Shamdivan. These are the real leading lights of building capacity in environmental law in India. Take their help. You will be an institution which everyone would be looking up to, not just for repeating whatever others are doing, but for solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for illuminating us and enriching us with your address. Now we have a couple of questions from the attendees. If you allow me, I would like to pose those questions. The first question is, what innovative approaches or technologies are being developed to address plastic pollution on a global scale, and how effective are they in reducing plastic waste?
Probably that's another session
I think the
entirely.
practitioner should have to go first. Yeah, please go ahead.
No, I was just saying that that perhaps would require another technical session to answer that. But yes, there have been several attempts I think the key issue is segregation. And segregation, and that's why I wanted to sort of emphasize the point on the role of the waste picker. Uh, Now, if you have good segregated material, there are different uses of plastics today. If you look at the way the cement industry is using plastic waste, if you look at the way oil recovery is being done, refined and used for various purposes, there are investments now. In fact, just the other day, we had a whole delegation from the Japan Bank of International Cooperation, and with private equity players now coming in, with wealth managers coming in, investment portfolios coming in lot of waste recovery plants. Uh, the trouble is, how do you get those technology transfers in a cost that is affordable? And secondly, the time period that it takes to establish one. I'll just give you one small example of the first waste to energy plant in Agra, in Kuberpur. And I was at the forefront trying to get it established, because you don't want a huge pile of waste near the Taj Mahal for sure. And Kuberpur was becoming a hillock like Bhalsava or Ghazipur in Delhi, and it took us almost 4.5 years to get all the clearances in place, including the permission from the Supreme Court, just to get a simple waste to energy plant established. I think we need to really, really shorten these processes. Of course, there should be examination of the technical standards. There should be, a facilitation of how to establish this. Technology has to be proven, etc., etc. But if you talk from the inside, I know how difficult it was to get a simple waste to energy plant set up, who would also be engaged in biomining, who would also be engaged in bioremediation, and so on and so forth. So there are technologies out there. There are uses out there. People are talking about plastic briquettes now to be used in furnaces. People are talking about oil. People are talking about addition to the road building. So there are many uses that people have now figured out. But I think the manner in which we are getting them established, the manner in which, in fact, there'll be a lot of fly-by-night operators who will claim to do a lot of things are also out there, and you need a very discerning eye to look at who's genuine, who's actually a proper investor, who's actually trying to get his money back. Because at the end of the day, any private investor wants their ROI, and unless the power purchase agreements are not in place or not enabling, nobody's going to come and waste their money. So there has to be an enabling framework. The technology is out there, the industries are out there, the investors are out there. The only trick is how do we get them all together to establish. So that's my short response.
As Sanjay rightly said, you need a separate session and perhaps a series of sessions to really reflect on the kind of solutions that are already there that can be put to the best kind of use. You know the basic principle behind waste management. The generator is primarily responsible for an environmentally benign disposal of it. The extended producer responsibility flows from that. And it did not happen overnight. When once you make the regulations stringent, and the real player who has been responsible for the generation and non-disposal, the very producer, the manufacturer, and when once you tighten the screws, they themselves will come up with solutions. I will give you a very simple example. Fly ash. Fly ash management in the law that existed earlier made the thermal power plants responsible for a safe disposal of fly ash, failing which certain consequences would follow, penal and other kinds of sanctions, compensatory and penal sanctions. And you know what they did? They all came together, and I was part of that particular meeting, so I can tell you for sure what actually transpired. And the coal ministry was very much in favor of this particular industry, that we not only contribute to the energy supply for the state, but we are also being put on such a kind of a situation where we become liable to deal with this. Can the state not come up with a regulation whereby the fly ash could be profitably put to use? Well, we asked for solutions from them. They said that they could be used in bricks and things like that. And why don't you share the responsibility of transport cost either in construction industry, including road construction or the building construction, and for which you shall partly be responsible for meeting those overheads. Lo behold, a set of regulations came to really help the thermal power plants in dealing with fly ash. Something which became the responsibility led to the builders being held responsible to use a part of other than cement and other than the other raw materials for building construction, a bit of fly ash as well. Similarly, with regard to this waste management of the plastic kind, there are solutions available with the industry itself. The only trick that lies is as to who will bear the cost of that technology import and application. Well, there has to be some kind of a negotiation whereby the very generator whose primary function is essentially to manufacture and supply, to bear the cost of that, and at the same time be able to apply that and then pass on only a part of that burden on the ultimate consumer. This is about the modern technology that's available. But there are certain alternatives that are available to the plastic. We need to explore that. And that's available natively, that's available locally. And it is not just that we cannot do without plastics. And that's something that we should bear in mind. It is not inevitable and it is not out of hand. And that needed to be really tapped. And that's exactly the reason why you needed to bring in the community, you needed to bring in the local rag picker into the whole scheme of things. Solutions will emerge out of it. I think I should stop here. There are specific instances as to how this has happened. In Pune, it has happened. In Bengaluru, it is happening. I'm quite sure that it is happening in so many other places in India. Get these best practices, put them together, make it part of the SOP, Standard Operational Procedure of Implementation. You don't have to import technology at huge cost. It's happening. Well, if you have workshops and programs and capacity building exercises, many such examples can be put together and brought into application. Only thing is the wherewithal to put this into application. Ultimately, the crux lies in that.
Sir, we have two more questions. Both seem to convey similar meaning, so I'll ask both the questions together and then can go ahead with the answer. On 1st July 2022 has seen one of the largest mass nationwide ban on single-use plastic when India had amended the relevant provisions and introduced the strict penalties and restrictions. We observed the changes in and around us, like the coconut vendors were not giving plastic straws and the birthday shops stopped selling balloons. But with time, we saw that the things came back to the market. Where do we actually lack more? On the implementation of laws or on the citizen awareness and sensitization? This was the first question. The second question is pretty similar, which says, who is more responsible for plastic pollution in India? That is government or companies that produce plastic or consumers?
I'll let Professor
Answer
Ramesh
that
go
was
first.
given to you. It's a combination of both. The one who is responsible to get it enforced without fear or favor, not happening. And number two, the alternative to plastic, which is already available, not being encouraged to be applied. It's nothing to do with sensitization or conscientizement or anything like that. We all know about it. We just don't care. We just don't care and we just go by the easy solution. We just look into convenience, which makes life inconvenient for us over a period of time. That's where exactly the problem lies, the hypocrisy of the entire exercise, and not just celebrations of the kind that you see on display all the while. It's a combination of both capacity, enforcement, accountability, alternative, put them into application, and ensuring that they are constantly being monitored and the communities insist on that. How is it that many a time we only take these paper bags and also the cloth bags to the shops? Because some of the shops insist that we will not really allow anybody to bring plastic bags into the shop. It has to happen that way. And it has to happen from everyone's exercise and experience that you refuse to take it from such a vendor who gives you with a plastic straw. Have you done that? And it is not just about enforcement. It is not just about provisions in law. It is not just about coming up with some exciting provisions and not doing anything about it. Okay. Yeah, Sanjay.
Yeah, no, I echo exactly what you just said, Professor Ramesh. I think if you look at alternatives, I think they do exist. The problem is cost sometimes. But you know, when you talk about scale, cost automatically comes down. So it's a matter of scale when you're talking about alternatives, and therefore the reduction in cost. Because I remember talking to the Chief Election Commissioner, the current one, when I told him that you have 3 advisories on PVC banners. I'm just coming back to that. And his first question to me was, what is the alternative? And I told him that, why are you talking about alternatives? All the elections from the 50s onwards, we've been using cloth and we've been using those flags which are, helping so many weavers, etc. So alternatives do exist. They're not very expensive. A bit of, technological evolution makes it as flashy as a, PVC banner. Uh, but his answer was very straightforward. The moment we put a ban, it's going to be followed in breach. So therefore, it has to be gradual, it has to be, iterative, and so on. So I think it's a lot about human behavior and, self-regulation in many ways that you alluded to. So alternatives do exist. Cost and scale has to be looked at. Behavior is something which is very important. And I think in a typical human element is, do we link regulation with incentives rather than only command and control? I think we need to really work towards incentives because that works. Even today, if you have that little bottle, you go back and give and get 5 rupees. People do go back and give that bottle and get those 5 rupees back. So I think somewhere you have to build in your cost structure as well, as to how do we recycle, how do we reuse, how do we make it, aesthetically reused. I mean, I have a friend who's now working on using plastic for setting up a film stage, with recycled plastic. So there are so many different ways of using it. So somewhere I think innovations are important, incentives are important, alternatives at scale is important, and most importantly, as Professor Ramesh said, human behavior and, regulation of your self behavior. I think those are the basic or simple solutions, rather than blaming anybody, whether the company is at fault or whether the government is at fault, because they will be what they are. I think we need to work towards making them work as well, and that's also our responsibility. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, sir. Now proceeding towards the conclusion of the program, I would like to request Dr. Atul Jayabhai, Assistant Professor of Law, HNLU, to propose a formal vote of thanks.
Thank you, madam.
Over to you,
Good
sir.
evening to one and all. On behalf of Hidayatullah National University, Raipur, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to our esteemed panelists for their invaluable contributions during today's insightful panel discussion on solutions to plastic pollution. Firstly, I extend my heartfelt thanks to Mr. Sanjay Upadhyay, Advocate, Supreme Court of India, for your captivating presence and valuable insights. Sir, your expertise has provided a fresh and unique perspective, challenging our assumptions and inspiring innovative thinking. Sir has discussed about the importance and issues of plastic waste management rules. Sir has also elaborated various guidelines on plastic waste which are very much crucial. Thank you, sir. Furthermore, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to Professor Dr. M.K. Ramesh, former Professor of Law, NLSIU Bangalore, for your insightful contributions. Sir has shed light on lesser known aspects of the topic, providing a comprehensive view that has deepened our understanding. Sir has also highlighted the gaps and discussed the problems and enforcement issues of environmental law. As Sir said, we are following the same story. However, there is no solution till date for environment pollution. Sir has also emphasized on the role of local bodies to curb the environment pollution. Thank you, sir. Further, I am also thankful to Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Dr. V.C. Vivekanandan, HNLU, for his exceptional leadership, vision, and unwavering support to our university. I also thank Professor Dr. Uday Shankar, Registrar, HNLU, for your support and guidance. Furthermore, I express my sincere gratitude to Professor Dr. Yogendra Kumar Srivastav, Professor of Law and Director, School for Law and Public Policy, HNLU, and Dr. Rana Nonit Roy, Associate Professor and Coordinator, Center for Environmental Laws, HNLU, for organizing this wonderful event on World Environment Day. I also express my sincere appreciation to Dr. Ankit Awasthi and Ms. Uri Srivastav, Assistant Professors at HNLU, for moderating and anchoring this session seamlessly. In conclusion, I also thank to all the faculty members of HNLU and the participants, attendees for your contributions, queries, support, and guidance. So at the end, happy World Environment Day to all of you, and let us give our coming generations a healthier and happier environment to have a beautiful life. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.